They say some families wear pride like a badge. Mine wears it like armor. My name is Amelia Ross, and in my family, excellence isn't celebrated, it's expected. I'm 27, a field intelligence officer, and the daughter of Colonel Arthur Ross, U.S. Army, RET. That name, Ross, has weight, not just within the military, but within our walls. It carries duty, discipline, and legacy. Love, affection, softness, those were never part of the Ross vocabulary. We weren't raised to be close. We were raised to be capable. My father led by command, not by care. He spoke in clipped sentences and measured looks. My mother, prim and proper, ironed his shirts and reinforced the rules. My brothers, Ethan, the golden firstborn, and Caleb, the rising star, followed suit like it was in their DNA. Obedience, precision, control. I was the only one who ever asked why. And in a house like ours, why is a threat. From the outside, we were a portrait of American strength. Family photos in crisp uniforms, 4th of July barbecues with flags and medals, neighbors whispering how proud my parents must be to have 3 children in uniform. But behind the smiles, it was a war zone. At the dinner table, conversations weren't conversations, they were reports. Caleb made marksmen. Ethan's leading drills at Fort Lewis. Amelia, any word on your new assignment? I lived in their shadow, and they didn't even know it. The truth is, I worked twice as hard to prove I wasn't the weak link. I graduated from the academy, not top of my class, but solid. I passed selection for field intelligence. I was deployed. I learned languages, tracked data, followed orders. I saved lives they'll never know about. But no matter what I did, I wasn't them. I wasn't Ethan, the soldier with a jawline carved from stone and a service record like a recruitment poster. I wasn't Caleb, the strategic genius who made my father beam with pride. I was just Amelia. To my father, I was difficult. To Ethan, I was immature. To Caleb, I was invisible unless I embarrassed him. There was one moment, one small thing that stuck with me. It was a month before my last deployment. We were all home for my father's retirement party. Medals shined. Old friends shook hands. I stood in my uniform beside Ethan and Caleb as they gave a toast. The crowd clapped politely. Then someone, an old colonel, drunk and harmless, slurred, "3 Ross kids in the service." Impressive. Though the girls probably just paperwork and coffee, huh? Everyone laughed, including my father. I didn't. That night, I packed early, left without saying goodbye. The thing is, I didn't join the Army to impress them. I did it because I believed in the work, in helping people, in making sense of chaos. But somehow, no matter how far I went, I carried the weight of their judgment with me. And I was tired of measuring up, tired of being compared, tired of never being enough. Still, I kept pushing. Missions came and went, some quiet, some brutal. And on the horizon, something was brewing, a decision that would change everything. But back then, I didn't know. I was still trying to be a Ross, still hoping one day they'd see me, not the disappointment. Just me. There was no warning, no dramatic music, no voice in my head whispering, "Everything changes today." Just the usual, briefing at 0500, coffee too bitter to drink, and a classified folder thick with intel. We were in northern Darka, assisting local efforts to secure aid routes after rebel interference. My job was intel coordination, extracting data from local sources, analyzing satellite reports, ensuring no one walked into a trap. Nothing glamorous, but vital. The problem started 3 days into the operation. A convoy carrying medical aid had rerouted due to washed-out roads. Command ordered us to pull back, wait for confirmation. But the intel coming through didn't sit right. A young boy, no older than 15, slipped through a checkpoint to get to our outpost. He wasn't a plant. He was shaking, terrified. Said his village was being used as bait. I double-checked every feed. The convoy wasn't safe. Not from nature, from people. I radioed command, requested clearance to intercept and warn the drivers directly. They denied it. Standard protocol, do not engage unless fired upon. Wait for confirmation. Trust command. But I'd seen what waiting cost. So I made the call. I led a small team out, unauthorized, flanked the convoy, and diverted them just in time. 27 aid workers lived because of it, and 3 days later, I was pulled from the field. No medals, no commendations, just a cold room, an officer I'd never met, and a statement: "You violated protocol. You're being relieved of duty pending investigation." I wasn't court-martialed. I wasn't imprisoned. I was suspended, stripped of my authority, sent home in civilian clothes, and told to wait. Wait for what? An apology? A second chance? None came. When I got home, my father was waiting in the driveway. He didn't speak, just stood with his arms crossed, the same way he had when I was 12 and forgot to salute at a memorial. We sat in the living room, the silence louder than gunfire. He didn't yell. He didn't ask why. He just said, "You've brought shame to this family." That was all. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What happened out there?" Just shame. Like I was a stain on his uniform. Ethan arrived the next day. He barely looked at me. "You went against command," he said flatly. "It's black and white." "No," I snapped. "It's gray. People lived because I acted." "That's not your call." "I was there." "You were reckless." Caleb came later, fresh from base, chest full of ambition. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd see me. Remember the sister who taught him how to sneak out of inspection, who held his hand when our dog died. But no, he just said, "You made things hard for all of us, Amelia." That night, they called a family meeting. Around the same dinner table where I once recited multiplication tables with ketchup on my nose, I was put on trial. "We've spoken with the estate lawyer," Ethan said. "Given the circumstances," Caleb added, "it's only fair that your portion be reconsidered." I blinked. What portion? The house? The land? The trust? You've distanced yourself from the legacy, Amelia. That comes with consequences. I laughed. I don't know why. Maybe to keep from screaming. "You think I care about your damn legacy?" I said, rising from my chair. "Take it. Take the house. Take the medals. Take the name." I paused. "No, actually, keep the name. I'm done with it." And I walked out. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't say goodbye. I just left. No home, no job, no uniform, just me, a disgrace, a ghost. And for the first time in my life, I was free. Free from expectations, from judgment, from the shadow of being a Ross. But freedom, I learned quickly, was cold and hungry and lonely. I waited for someone to call. They didn't. I waited for the army to reach out. They didn't. The world moved on, and I disappeared. And in that silence, something inside me changed. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to break. I was going to become someone they didn't see coming. The army never really lets go of its ghosts. I was living in a crumbling apartment above a mechanic shop, drinking burnt coffee and working night security when the letter came. A plain envelope. No insignia, just my name. Amelia Ross. Inside, a single sentence. "Report to Joint Command, Fort Greystone, Clearance Alpha, immediate." At first, I thought it was a mistake, a cruel joke. But something about the wording. I knew. Someone had been watching. Someone had read my file, really read it, and decided they didn't care about the suspension. They cared about results. And I delivered. That was 3 years ago. Since then, I've disappeared in a dozen countries, walked through borderless jungles and bomb-scarred cities. I've chased warlords, intercepted rogue tech shipments, and done things I'm still not sure I understand. I operated under names that weren't mine, in places that don't exist on maps. I wasn't a soldier anymore. I was a weapon, and I was good at it. Every successful mission brought me deeper into the shadows. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped justifying my decisions. I became the kind of officer people didn't question. Eventually, the suspension was quietly lifted. A retroactive review approved my actions in Darka. I was offered my old rank back. I declined. Instead, I accepted a transfer to Joint Special Intel Command, where no one cared about last names, only outcomes. A year ago, I was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel. No fanfare, no ceremony. Just a new badge, a new ID, and an even thicker folder of classified operations. No one in my family knew. I didn't tell them. I didn't need to. They had made it clear I was no longer one of them, but the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Last week, a white envelope arrived. No rank, no seal, just a name in fancy font. You are cordially invited to the promotion ceremony of Lieutenant Caleb Ross. Family attendance requested. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I missed them, not because I cared about Caleb's shiny new insignia, but because of what it represented. They still thought I was nothing, just some disgraced former soldier drifting through civilian life. They had no idea, no clue where I'd been, what I'd done, what I'd become. To them, I had vanished, a stain removed from their reputation, but I hadn't vanished. I had risen, silently, relentlessly, and now I was coming back, not for revenge, not for their approval, just for the look on their faces. I spent an hour debating what to wear. My uniform was regulation pressed and flawless, but I chose something else. My black formal officer's jacket with silver accents, new rank displayed proudly, clean, commanding, unmistakable. I pulled up to Fort Belridge 3 minutes before the ceremony started. I wasn't nervous. I'd faced warlords with bombs under their vests. I'd crossed minefields at night. But facing them, my father, my brothers, that made my hands shake. The auditorium buzzed with applause as I slipped into the back row unnoticed. Caleb stood on stage, posture perfect. My father sat in the front row next to Ethan, medals on their chests, smiles on their faces. The commanding officer, a General Whitaker, stepped forward to speak. I remembered him from a distant mission 2 years ago. We'd worked together during an operation in Eastern Europe. He hadn't seen me yet, until he did. He paused, mid-sentence. Then he blinked. Then he smiled. He leaned slightly toward the mic and said, loud enough for the front rows to hear, "Well, I'll be damned. Lieutenant Colonel Ross, is that you back there?" Every head turned. The room fell silent, and I stepped forward. All I heard was the soft echo of my boots on the auditorium floor. Rows of chairs blurred past me. My eyes didn't flinch. Not at my father's stiffened shoulders, not at Ethan's slack jaw, not at Caleb's frozen smile. I walked with the calm of someone who's walked through far worse. General Whitaker stepped down from the podium and met me halfway. "Didn't expect to see you here, Ross," he said, extending a hand. "But I'm damn glad I did." I took his hand firmly. "Couldn't miss a Ross promotion, sir." He chuckled, knowingly. "And I thought I was the only one who knew the kind of work you've been doing." He turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. But when someone like Lieutenant Colonel Amelia Ross walks into the room, well, that's not something you ignore." A ripple of murmurs broke through the audience. My father turned slowly, his expression unreadable. My mother's hand went to her mouth. Ethan leaned forward like he couldn't quite believe it. And Caleb, he looked like a boy again, confused, off script. I stood beside the stage, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Amelia Ross," General Whitaker said, "has led some of the most delicate and dangerous operations I've ever read. Hell, operations I wasn't even supposed to read. When half the world was focused on headlines, she was 3 steps ahead, behind them." He gestured toward me. "You want to talk about leadership? Quiet valor? Service that expects nothing in return? That's your example right there." Silence. Not the kind that judges, the kind that remembers. When he finished his speech, the ceremony resumed. Caleb pinned his new rank to his shoulder. There were polite claps. A few people came up to shake his hand. But the electricity in the room had shifted. It wasn't his night anymore. It was mine. Afterward, I walked toward the courtyard alone. The air was cooler now. A breeze moved through the flags like a sigh. And then I heard footsteps. Caleb approached first. His eyes flickered with something like shame. Or awe. Maybe both. "You never told us," he said. I didn't smile. "You never asked." He hesitated. "I thought you left the army." "You thought wrong." Ethan came next. He looked older somehow, more tired. You've been active all this time? He asked. And a lieutenant colonel? I nodded. Promoted last year, quiet orders. You weren't cleared to know. His jaw clenched. Why didn't you say anything? I tilted my head. Why would I? You made it clear I didn't belong. Then came the sound I never thought I'd hear again, my father's voice. You went against command. You got suspended. I turned slowly. He looked at me not with pride, not yet, but with something more honest, uncertainty. Suspension was reversed, I said evenly. My actions were justified. I saved lives. You never asked why I did what I did. He opened his mouth, then shut it. I stepped forward, eyes locked on his. You raised us to follow orders, but you never taught us when not to. I learned that on my own. He looked down. I didn't need more, not an apology, not a speech. The silence was enough. I turned to leave, but paused. I don't want your legacy, I said. I've built my own. Then I walked away. Not out of shame, not out of exile, but with dignity, with peace, with the truth that no one could take from me. Sometimes the strongest thing you'll ever do is to stand when no one claps. I stood alone. I rebuilt myself from ashes they left behind. I bled in silence. I won battles no one will ever read about. And when I walked back into that room, shoulders straight, chin high, they saw it. They saw me, not the girl who failed, the woman who refused to stay down. So if you're out there, fighting alone, doubting yourself, surrounded by silence, stand anyway. Even when they say you can't, especially when they say you won't. Because one day, they'll look at you the way they never did before, and you'll know. You were always enough.